New York State corrections officers and sergeants continue to illegally strike for a second week as mediation stretches into a fourth day.
Striking workers continue to cover their faces out of fear of retribution outside of Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining. Some, we're told, went back to work Thursday after the state of New York listed names in court filings this week trying to force an end to the strike.
With all the threats the governor's office has made, with staff being served with their court orders, I understand why someone would not want to be out here.
So some people have gone back to work because of that?
Yes.
So the New York State correction officer strike is still ongoing at this moment in time, despite the fact that Governor Kathy Hochul has done everything and anything to downplay this particular strike, and she's threatening all these different correction officers with losing their health care if they refuse to return back to work. But as we discussed in a previous video, the conditions in these prisons have been deteriorating for a very long time, and the prison guards have finally said, even though it's illegal, even though they can face consequences, enough is enough, and that is why they're out having this particular strike. Now, in my previous video, I actually asked prison people to reach out to me in order to tell me what was going on during the course of this particular strike. And by the way, if I did not respond to your email individually, I'm sorry. I got flooded with so many emails for so many different people trying to get their story out there, and I'd like to bring some of this information to the forefront for you guys out there in the audience so you could understand how bad things have gotten, especially since the passage of a woke criminal justice reform bill that affected prisons in 2022. That seems to be the primary issue that is increasing the violence in these particular prisons, in addition to the fact that Governor Kathy Hochul made the horrible mistake of deciding to close 2 correctional facilities, thus creating some overcrowding. Now, we're going to get into this. We are going to break this down. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
So look, even though I've obviously thrown my support behind the correction officers in this moment of crisis because I've looked at what they're facing and I completely understand why they need some changes in order to feel safe and actually tangibly be safe at work, the fact of the matter is we have to be open and honest about this, and this strike is 100% an illegal strike. You cannot have the corrections officers strike in the same way that you are actually not allowed to have police officers strike. So let us make that clear to everybody out there in the audience. These security guards or these correction officers, to be clear, are breaking the law, but they're doing so because the risk of going to work appears to be much higher than the consequences that they would face for going on strike. Now, there are 2 key components to this that appear to have led to this strike from all of the different messages that I got from all these different various correction officers. And again, I thank all of you for giving me the information so that I can move forward with a more informed opinion about this particular strike.
Corrections officers now on their 12th day of striking, even after a deal was made between the union and the State Department of Corrections.
That agreement reached late last night, but since this is an unsanctioned strike, there will not be a formal vote among union members. It's now up to each worker individually to make their own decision. We want to show you some key points in this new agreement, again, that came out late last night. Any employee that returns to work will not be disciplined for striking. The HALT Act would be suspended for 90 days, and the National Guard will continue to help with staffing levels as employees return to work.
So right there you see the deal that is offered to the corrections officers, which must be taken up on an individual basis, says that they are going to suspend something called the HALT Act, which is one of the primary things that these prison guards seem to be striking over. And the HALT Act was passed in 2022 under the fervor of criminal justice reform, and the idea behind it, in theory, was that it was going to restrict solitary confinement usage by corrections officers, because solitary confinement is a very inhumane way of treating even the worst in our society. However, in practice and in the actual text of the law, what you find out is that it over restricts in the other direction what corrections officers can do with dangerous, violent inmates. A lot of people in emails described the solitary confinement, or the things that the HALT Act actually prevents them from doing, is essentially preventing them from putting inmates that are already in a jail within the jail, especially when they repeat offend and they attack guards or attack other inmates, and thus this has raised the level of violence in all these different various various prisons. So the HALT Act went into effect across the state in the year 2022, and it requires all prisoners to be let out of their cells every day for at least 7 hours and limits the amount of time of solitary confinement an inmate can get. Now, there's a bunch of different limits, but I want to talk about the general limit versus the specific population limit, because the general limit is 15 days, and of course, there's a certain amount of times that you can go to solitary within a 60-day time period and all of that, but the special populations is even more absurd than that. Special populations includes anyone aged 21 or younger. So you cannot use solitary confinement at all against somebody aged 18 until they're age 22, which is ridiculous, especially when you consider people tend to be more violent around this time period than they are post this time period. So essentially, you're restricting the prison from being able to discipline the most likely inmates to commit violence. That's absurd. And the results of the HALT Act are absolutely clear. In the 2 years since it took effect, state prisons have seen a 32% increase in assaults on staff. And if you're wondering, since this law was about protecting the innocent Baba Angel inmates, our precious angels who never did nothing wrong and are only there because of the systemic systems, well, guess what? Those assaults are up 81%. So by an even greater margin, violence among prisoners has increased than the violence against correction staff. So if you thought this was helping them, if you thought this was protecting these innocent little Baba Angels, it turns out you're dead wrong. It made everything worse. And of course, this comes from an article where it says the New York State Assembly has decided that they are not going to revisit repealing the HALT Act. They're going to leave it in place no matter what, which is why these prison guards are still on strike.
That's right, Jeff Leah. 12 days strong here on the picket line at Wendy. And don't get it mixed up. This might be a small crowd right now, but earlier today there were dozens and dozens of people. And this does not mean the strike is over. It actually means that they're going home to spend some time with their families. Now let's talk about that deal that was presented to them earlier today. I spent time at Attica, Wyoming, and here at Wendy, and every single one of them telling me it's just not enough. So I had to ask current and former COs why they feel that way.
Now look, obviously I am not blind to the data around solitary confinement and how it can obviously drive people insane and cause a bunch of different various problems for the inmate, which of course go against a long-term rehabilitation objective. But the fact of the matter is, having something as ironclad as a 7-hour mandatory out of your cell time is going to lead to disaster, because that is a right guaranteed to all these different various inmates. And the fact of the matter is, there's a certain subgroup within the inmates, just like there's a subgroup within our society that are just more prone to criminality, more prone to attack people than the larger inmate population. And yes, you should be able to separate that subgroup from general population in order to better secure the prison overall. Now, whether or not this needs to be in the whole or solitary confinement or something of the sort, that can remain to be determined at some other point in time. But the fact of the matter is, this haphazard solution that comes from the HALT Act has been a disaster for all these different various guards, and we see the violence increasing in these prisons, and this is because they cannot remove these especially violent actors from the general population for any serious amount of time. And again, maybe you want to make it so that solitary confinement is more sparingly used or something of the sort, or maybe you want to have a special designated maximum security wing in these prisons where you separate them out from general population. But the idea that you're just going to guarantee them 7 hours of freedom from their cell, while it might sound nice, is completely delusional and absurd, especially when you see the uptick in violence that has been going on for years. In addition to that, Governor Kathy Hochul is also pressing forward to close more prisons. 2 facilities have already been closed in the state of New York, and when those facilities get closed, what ultimately ends up happening? You have an overcrowded prison where the guards can't really discipline people. These kind of procedures are driving people out of the profession, so then they're short-staffed. And in addition to that, we have these mandatory overtimes, which are not just once in a while you have to work a 16-hour shift. These are after your forced to work a 16-hour shift, they're still short-staffed, so they ask you for an additional 8 hours. And when I say ask, I mean they force you. So you have these guards that are limited in staff working 24-hour shifts for inmates that are ever more violent in a prison that's ever more overcrowded, where the tools that correction officers have are being removed from them piece by piece by piece. So a 90-day suspension of some of the provisions of the HALT Act obviously is a slap in the face to these guards. The New York State legislature needs to actually move, but it seems like their strategy is essentially to just kind of try to make this blow over, protect Governor Kathy Hochul's image, and then in 90 days have these people suck it up and deal with these problems then in the future.
There was literally nothing in there that's applicable, that wasn't asked for, and resolves any of our issues.
A resounding no. That's the response I heard at Attica, Wyoming, and Wendy correctional facilities to whether they think the offer posed by the state will convince corrections officers to return to work.
I apologize for laughing.
The general consensus is that it was an insult, a slap in the face.
They're all unhappy.
I think this membership feels insulted by this deal.
That deal includes a 90-day suspension of the HALT Act, which limits solitary confinement, followed by a review to see if it can be safely restored. A 4-shift maximum on mandated overtime, no internal discipline for striking, however Taylor law fines still apply, and multiple chances for increased pay for working overtime, referring workers, and being excessively mandated, as long as they return by Saturday.
You know, honestly, I gotta love some of the solidarity that I'm seeing by these different guards. So again, as we talked about earlier on, there are consequences for striking for the current corrections officers in the state of New York. It is illegal to do so, so they cannot go to the camera and speak to their issues, but you have all these different people that are in the corrections community. They're retired officers coming out in order to be a voice for their brethren, and I respect the hell out of them for doing so, because otherwise these people would not be able to do interviews to talk about the issues that they're facing, and Governor Kathy Hochul would continue to be able to set the narrative as she's desperately trying to do. And by the way, what a disaster Governor Kathy Hochul has been for the state of New York. This is somebody who keeps defending bail reform. This is somebody who stripped her lieutenant governor of all of his powers recently because he dared challenge him. And now you have a corrections officer strike based on a 2022 law that she herself ended up supporting and still supports to this day, while at the same time all these other problems are spiraling out of control in the state of New York. And I talked about this before, and I will mention it again. The state of Florida has 1 to 2 million more people than the state of New York. The budget for the entire Florida state government is about $116 billion. The budget for the state of New York is around $252 billion. So double the budget of the state of Florida, when the state of Florida has a larger population than the state of New York. And what do we get for that money? We get guards that are just not protected, not nearly enough staff, closures of prisons, all these other different ridiculous programs, while at the same time our bare minimums are not being met. It makes sense that you have the most dangerous people to be housed in facilities that are adequate to keep them from inflicting pain on those we chose in order to guard them. And the closure of prisons is such a ridiculously stupid policy from the Democrats, because one of the things that we find out is that population density in prisons strongly correlates with violence in those prisons. So it's actually much better to run prisons that are below their population capacity than to have less prisons with higher population capacity, because that ultimately ends up leading to more violence in those prisons. But of course, Governor Kathy Hochul is going in the other direction. She's listening to the abolish prison ilk that are in the left wing, and the consequences of this are not only paid by these guards, by these people who work in order to protect us, in order to maintain the incapacitation of the most dangerous from our society, but it also negatively impacts the inmates themselves, who are also experiencing increasing levels of violence. There was a headline that 2 people died the other day during this particular inmate strike, and this is while the National Guard is there. And by the way, the National Guard have been publishing photos of them at these facilities on the internet, and I don't even think I can show you some of them, because the facilities that we expect the correction officers to operate in are so disgusting, nasty, and ridiculous that National Guard members who served overseas say that it's worse than Iraq. It's worse than Afghanistan. And again, this isn't even the primary thing these corrections officers are complaining about. They're upset that they don't get to see their families. They're upset that the prisons are understaffed, and they're upset that every year it seems like they're experiencing more and more violent attacks from inmates because the tools that they would normally use in order to deal with violence have been stripped away from them by progressives in the Democratic Party.
Many of the current and former COs I spoke with tell me this deal emphasized money more than their real concerns.
They didn't ask for more money. They asked for a safe working environment.
It's not about making more. It's about being able to safely go home and see your family.
COs tell me they have too many issues with the offer to count.
Again, I 100% agree with the corrections officers who feel insulted by this offer, because think about what they're actually getting put on the table for them in order to return to work. They have a huge problem with the HALT Act. So what Governor Kathy Hochul says is we're going to suspend it for 90 days, and then we're going to do a review where we decide that it's perfectly fine and you guys need to shut up, and then we're going to put it back into place. They were also upset that they would have to work back-to-back-to-back mandatory overtime shifts. So Governor Kathy Hochul says, okay, we're going to cap that at 4 consecutive overtime shifts that you're going to be forced to work. Now, again, 3 consecutive shifts is actually 24 hours, a full day of working. 4 is 32 hours, so they're going to cap it at higher than what they were complaining about in the previous video that we were discussing this. Now, I'm sure people love the 2.5 times overtime pay. It's obviously much better than time and a half, which is what you would normally get for working overtime. But the fact of the matter is, having these people work 32 hours in a row is extraordinarily dangerous, especially in conditions of overcrowded prisons where you cannot engage in proper discipline.
The changes to the HALT that are offered are listed as temporary, and as soon as these men and women go back in and get control of the prison population and get things going back to normal, it's going to go right back the way that it is now.
If you voluntarily work 832 hours a year of overtime, we'll try not to mandate you for more overtime. But if you don't work 832 hours a year, we're going to mandate you to work the 832 hours a year. What kind of deal is that?
I'm told until they get an offer that emphasizes staff safety first, these strikes will continue. How much longer do you think this strike could last for?
Until Kathy Hochul opens her eyes and does the right thing.
And again, it's absolutely crucial that you guys understand that it's not just coming from me, that it's not about the money. This is something that has been sent to me in email after email after email. And again, thank you to everybody who reached out to me. I'm sorry that I could not respond to all of your different emails. And it was just stated right there. No amount of money is worth never seeing your family. Remember the signs that we saw early on in this process in the first video where I covered this, where they were complaining about the fact that inmates get to see their families more than the people who work for us in order to protect us from them. And they keep getting offered more and more money in order to get them back to work, because that's the only language that the Democrats understand. That's the only language that Governor Kathy Hochul understands. So she thinks that she could just bribe them with our own tax dollars in order to paper over this. However, this is not an authorized union strike or authorized union negotiation that's about more health care over here, more pension benefits over there. This is about the safety of these guards. This is about real policy change that has happened at the statewide level and the impact on these everyday people who work in these absolutely crucial positions.
Do you feel that an end is near from this strike?
No, maybe the weather will be a little warmer in a few months.
What do you think of the deal that was reached last night?
It's garbage. I think Governor Hochul should change the spelling of her last name, the first letter, from an H to a J, because she is a joke. The whole deal is garbage, and I would not go back in the jail with that deal.
I would like these elected officials put on a blue shirt, go walk around one maximum security jail for 10 minutes. I bet you they'd be running right out that front door.
Yeah, these guys are not idiots. They're not being fooled, and Governor Kathy Hochul can try to force them back into the prisons, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of these people seem to be ready to move on if they don't actually get the changes that they want. Obviously, they want to serve the community. They want it to be corrections officers. Obviously, they enjoy the benefits. They would love more pay. Who doesn't love more pay? But these negotiations are not about more pay. They're not about more benefits. They're about the safety safety of the people that we assign to watch and guard the dredges of our society, and that has been deprioritized for far too long. Too many prisons have been closed. The population is just overcrowded, and they've said enough is enough. And again, on this channel, I have gone after many a different times public sector unions for essentially negotiating against the taxpayer, bribing politicians, and then using them to give themselves cushy, unsustainable government contracts. But this ask right here is not of the same kind that I've targeted in the past. This is an ask for basic workplace safety in our prisons, and for Governor Kathy Hochul and all the stupid Democrats that are in office to recognize the fact that these people provide an essential service to our state, again, protecting us and helping to incapacitate the most dangerous among us. And we don't see this as often as we see attacks on police officers here or there or whatever, but this is a 24-hour job that needs to be fully staffed because the danger is always afoot. They are always surrounded by criminals each and every day, people that are just itching for a way to figure out how to attack them, how to attack other inmates, and they deserve to be protected, equipped, and basically not worked into the ground in order to do that job because it's that important. So I genuinely do respect all these different correctional officers for looking at the dopey Governor Kathy Hochul in the face and telling her straight up, it's not about the money, it's about their safety, it's about being able to see their families, and they will not return to work until they actually address the problems that are going on in New York State correctional facilities. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the disaster that was caused by Governor Kathy Hochul. Till next time.